Chapter 34, Growing Mob Wary. The infighting and manipulation were never ending. The upper echelon mafia members were all locked down in Pelican Bay Shoe, but on weekends, they were all out in the visiting area, taking care of mob business and politicking against each other. Openly, they ordered hits, sent messages, and gave instructions to underlings or their wives about drug deals and territory disputes 800 miles away in Los Angeles. It became clearer and clearer to Boxer Enriquez that none of them could see beyond that little box of gang life. His former cellmate Daryl Night Owl Baca was no exception. All that was left on their former partnership was bitterness and vengeance. They still lived in the same pod but were in separate cells. Baca was on the second tier and Boxer was on the lower tier. Immediately after the argument they had about Night Owl's desire to kill associate Cynthia, aka Hottie, the two enemies had vowed to meet up in the upper tier shower and fight to the death. 3 days a week, Baca was a tier tender who helped with some routine maintenance duties. He went to take a shower after completing his task, delaying for an hour, waiting and hoping the on-duty guard would forget he was there. Boxer rolled up his massive knife in a towel and shouted to the same guard to pop his door. He too wanted to shower. The correctional officer complied but insisted that Boxer stay on the lower tier. There was one shower upstairs and one downstairs. "You were chicken," chided Baca as he came by his new enemy's cell door the next day. A week later, the two rivals tried the same gambit to set up their Mortal Kombat. This time, Boxer, knife rolled up in his towel, automatically headed for the upper tier shower to face off against the waiting Baca. As he headed up the stairs, his heart was racing and his sweaty hands were trembling as the fingers of his right hand reached inside the towel and gripped the shank handle. "Baca, where you at?" asked the guard. "I'm in my cell drying off." In fact, he was still locked in the upper tier shower hiding. Boxer was about 10 feet away when he heard the remote controlled lock on the shower door disengage. Camaradas in the other cells felt the tension and had their eyes wide open, expecting blood to flow soon. Boxer knew that Baca, always in top physical condition, was bigger and stronger than he was. It wouldn't be difficult for Night Owl to overpower him in a fight. He needed to act swiftly, deliver an overhead death blow, and hope his opponent would bleed out on the floor. The shower door rolled open a few inches, then suddenly reversed itself and slammed shut. Boxer heard the guard say, "Wait, I think Baca's still in there." The correctional officer's instincts were right. He knew something was up. Returning to his cell, Boxer flushed the knife, expecting a search to follow. A few days later, while undertaking his tier duties, Baca stopped by Boxer's cell and said, "We need to stop this. We're friends. It doesn't look good to the camaradas." He stuck his pinky through a hole in the metal mesh door and the two carnales shook fingers. Boxer went along, but he knew it wasn't over. In the following days, Baca shot dirty looks at Boxer as he went about his tier tender duties. In the meantime, Boxer had acquired a new plexiglass knife. Camaradas used string as a saw and cut the shank from a plexiglass sheet that covered the cell doors of inmates known for gassing officers. It took two inmates, one in the cell and a tier tender from the outside, about 20 minutes to cut a strip all the way across the bottom of the plexiglass shield. Boxer secretly grabbed a hold of the new knife every time Boxer came around his cell. This is a footnote from the bottom of the page. Gassing is a common prison attack method used by inmates on correctional officers. It involves throwing a mixture of urine and feces into an officer's face. It is especially threatening and potentially deadly given the high rate of AIDS, HIV, and hepatitis among inmates. No more than a few weeks had passed before Baca couldn't resist shooting off his mouth. Walking by Boxer's cell, he again complained that Enriquez had cut him loose in business. "You picked a chick over me," he sneered. "You're talking like a ninja," chided Boxer, knowing that the black inmates were seen as loud and disruptive. It was no small insult in a prison environment steeped in racial animosities. The taunt was meant to sting, and it did. "I'm going to make you scream," threatened Baca as he moved in on a snit. "We'll see who screams," countered Boxer. Minutes later, Boxer heard other cell doors pop open down the row. Against prison policy, the guards was letting Night Owl Baca make deliveries of canteen items. Correctional officers are supposed to make these deliveries themselves. It was part of Baca's latest plot to get his arch rival. Eventually, Night Owl stood in front of Boxer's cell. He had on Converse tennis shoes that were laced up tight and an evil look in his eyes. Both were a signal to Boxer that something was up. "Crack this door so I can give him his canteen," shouted Baca to a guard in the control booth. Boxer jumped up from his bunk and reached for his knife, fumbled to remove the cellophane wrapper he used to keister it, and cocked back his arm, ready to attack. The cell door slid open a mere 6 inches as he heard Baca call out, "Open it some more." Baca had a bag of Dixie cups in his left hand and a washcloth in his right. Hidden underneath was a small razor blade poised to strike. He reached to hand the bag over. Boxer knocked it to the floor as Baca, razor in his right hand, slashed out at his wrist. All it caught was air as Baca jumped back to avoid the overhead swing of plexiglass aimed at his heart. The electronic door slammed shut between them. The guard was alerted by the commotion. "Why didn't you come out?" taunted Baca. "Why didn't you come in?" scoffed Boxer as the adrenaline rush of fear shot through his system like a streak of lightning. At the same time, it felt good to see Baca jump back to avoid the plunge of his blade. So, with a nervous chuckle, he delivered a final verbal blow. "You almost got your punk ass stabbed." Boxer still planned on killing Baca if he ever got a chance. Maybe during escort to the law library or the prison medical facility. Neither of them ever left his cell without a knife and a handcuff key hidden away. Boxer felt that Baca was a lousy, greedy businessman who turned his back on me over a buck. It wasn't the first time that he felt betrayed by another mafioso he thought was a good friend. He'd also become distrustful of his old pal and partner in crime, Jaco Padilla. Several years earlier, the two of them had been cellmates. Both were lingering in a visiting room corridor after completing their visits. They stood chained together with Carlos Diaz of San Diego, Boxer in the middle position, all waiting to go back to their cells. Laime's Mark Turtle Quiroz of Colton was locked up in a holding cell 10 feet away, also waiting to be processed in or out for a visit. Boxer was passing the time talking to Carlos when he noticed that Jaco was having a conversation with Turtle. Then he noticed Turtle suddenly pointing a finger in his direction. "Your celly?" he heard Turtle say to Jaco. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw Turtle make a thumbs down motion with his right hand, followed by a gesture that imitated a stabbing motion. He was telling Jaco to kill Boxer, his cellmate and friend. Jaco nodded his head as if to say okay. Boxer pretended he didn't see it, but it already felt like a stab to his heart. He wondered, is there any pure loyalty at all in the mob? Back in their cell, Jaco was acting a little distraught as the two cellies made small talk. Boxer had his knife out ready, waiting for his friend to make a move. He didn't. Instead, he left to take a shower. Boxer figured he'd gone for a shank. Later, he imagined his friend would try to stab or garrote him as he slept. Instead, Jaco announced that he was going to cell up with Steve Smiley Castillo, an MA associate and jailhouse lawyer, to get some legal work done. He moved out a week later. "I knew then," said Boxer, "something was wrong. Some mafioso had put me in the hat on the lista for no reason unknown. Some mafioso had put me in the hat on the lista for reasons unknown to me." Now Night Owl, Baca, and Jaco Padilla, former friends and allies, were plotting against him. It made Boxer sick. "I knew I had killed for Laime when others had been scared to kill. I've been involved in kamikaze hits beyond the normal devotion of the mafia and dedicated my entire life to being the best mafioso ever. Now it didn't make any sense at all. The mafia merry-go-round of murder would never stop. The pointless realities of a life in Laime were growing more and more tiresome. There were stinging reminders all around him that he was wasting his life in the mob." In 1993, Joe Morgan, the reputed godfather and ultimate MA icon, died alone in prison of cancer at the relatively young age of 64. His loss didn't seem to make much of a difference to anyone. Boxer remembered an institutional gang investigator asking him, after Morgan's death, what would happen. The mob was here before Joe died, he reflected, and it will be here after. In February 2001, the same fate befell Morgan's reputed successor, Topo Peters, who also died alone in prison of cancer at the age of 60. He was the product of an abusive alcoholic father who left when Topo was 8 and an overly protective mother and grandmother who always made excuses for him. Sadly, Topo told a prison psychologist in 1987 that he saw himself as a dummy. A prison evaluation report done months before he died noted that Topo has warned CDC staff that he is a target for assault by Mexican mafia members due to his illness and inability to function as an active gang member. The same document quoted him saying, "I'm never going to get out of prison and I don't want to die here." He did anyway. There were only a half dozen cars in his funeral procession driving into Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Covina Hills. Fewer than 24 mourners fit under one small awning at the gravesite. Boxer said coldly, "He was a dope fiend and a liar with no more credibility in the organization. We were going to kill him. He did us a favor by dying. No one cared." A month later, feared executioner Mike Acha Eisen, another mafia strongman and potential successor to Morgan, got into a pushing match at a sleazy bar on San Francisco Skid Row. He stabbed a guy in the back with a 3-inch buck knife, ran, and was chased by a half dozen black men who beat him to death with pool cues and an aluminum lawn chair. The 54-year-old MS stalwart had spent his last days as a crackhead, living in the Flophouse Hotel. "An addict on his way out," remarked the detective on the case. "He didn't die a very glorious death." Cops felt that Eisen's murder wasn't even worthy of prosecution. Boxer had idolized these murderous mafia legends, but was realizing that they ended up as nothing with nothing. They were men with limited outlooks who settled for a life behind bars, men who chose to destroy rather than build. Their choices were faulty and often driven by serious drug addictions that clouded their judgment and crippled their potential. All your ethics are destroyed by drugs. Inside the SHU at Pelican Bay, an environment built to isolate and contain prison gang predators, there was no mainline prey. So mafioso more and more turned on each other. Boxer learned that friendship in the mob is bullshit, and I grew tired of it. It was becoming increasingly clear to him that we, Eme, are the dregs of society. We have every personality disorder known to man and kill people for ridiculous reasons. Tupi Hernandez, who had challenged Topo's authority and was stabbed into humiliation at the federal building, had lost his mind. The organization ostracized him after he was hit. Boxer saw him in the PBSP visiting room, disheveled looking and all bug-eyed and paranoid, and Tupi whispered that there was a surveillance camera hidden in the heating vent of his cell. Hernandez actually believed that Topo had planted the secret device, which didn't exist, to spy on him. Boxer later heard that Tupi was standing around in his cell naked, talking to himself. He's a nutcase. That was a fate worse than death. Boxer had seen most of his support base disappear when Black Dan, Barella, Weddle Shy Shyrock, and Chewy Martinez were all shipped off to federal prison. "I always had affection for those guys," recollected Boxer. "In their eyes, I could do no wrong. They were my political support. They were gone." Little Mo Ruiz was just as good as gone. In 1997, he was stabbed by his cellmate, MA member Lalo Martinez. Mo was hit because of a dispute with the Guate Grajeda camp over a plan to murder Topo Peter's stool pigeon brother-in-law. Mo asked that the hit be delayed as a courtesy to Topo, who was in Los Angeles for the federal RICO trial at the time. The Guate faction didn't want to wait and felt that Mo was backing up a rat. Mo's troubles didn't end there. He screamed when Lalo stabbed him and then yelled, "I have AIDS." It was a ruse to make Lalo back off by making him think he might get an HIV infection from Mo's blood. That was seen by other mobsters as an act of cowardice. Boxer believed Mo is through. He doesn't realize it. He and his homies at White Fence think he's okay, but he's not. Boxer tried to give Mo a pass, but couldn't get it done. Daryl Night Owl Baca still wanted Enriquez dead, and Boxer could no longer trust his longtime pal, Jaco Padilla. His other loyal friend, Chuco Castro, was buried somewhere in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Boxer envied Chuco's new life, a second chance, living with his wife and children under an assumed name, free of the suffocating mafia politics.